Hello and welcome to Soul Talk with Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel. Rabbi Aaron, we are coming upon the holiday of Purim, which is a very fun and festive holiday. Part of it is we read the scroll of Esther, Megillat Esther, twice, interestingly enough. And it's a fantastic story. I think even in our today's times, there's so much we can relate to the story as far as evil, good, and that at the end of the day, we overcome evil. But the curiosity I have is that Megillat Esther, this scroll of Esther that we read on Purim twice at night and in the morning, is a part of the canonized text of the Torah. And yet there's no mention of God in the whole story. And that almost strikes me as rather odd because I would almost think God should be everywhere in the story. So how do we understand that this is in the Torah? It's a fantastic story, and yet we're not really seeing God mentioned in this story.
Yes, it's actually very interesting that it's called in Hebrew Megillat Esther, which literally is associated with the word Megillah is also legalot, which means to reveal. And Esther, which is the name of the lead role here, who played such a powerful role in saving the Jewish people. Her name Esther comes from the Hebrew word Hester, which means hidden. So really, there's a hint in the Megillat Esther to the revelation of hiddenness. What's being revealed in the story is the incredible presence of God that's hidden in everything that's happening. When people think about the almightiness of God, they very often think about the story of Passover and all those plagues and how God put King Pharaoh down and overcame this cruel man and split the Red Sea and drowned the entire mighty army. And that is a great show of almightiness. But the truth is, it's not so impressive that God has to even deal with a man at all. I mean, if God is almighty, the fact that he can, so to speak, flex his muscles and overcome this man with all these miracles is actually not so impressive. What's more impressive is the story of Purim, where God doesn't have any obvious intervention at all. Now that's almighty. I'm not going to get in the way. I'm going to let you make your choices, take your steps, work your plan out, and I'm going to show you that everything you do against me and my people is going to work on my behalf and on my people's behalf. Now that's really almighty. I don't have to get in your way. A fellow once explained to me that there's a difference between karate and tai chi. I hope I'm getting this right, but the concept will be important. He said that karate is basically getting in somebody's face. It's face-to-face combat, confrontation. But tai chi is somebody throws a punch at you and you don't stop the punch. You actually take the thrust of their punch and lead them across the room, and they throw themselves. You just guide them so you don't get in the way of their punch. You actually use their punch to bring them down. And that's really, in many ways, what Purim is about, this revelation of hiddenness, that there's all this hiddenness going on, and yet something's going on. You have a man named Haman who has decided he was he was a Hitler of his time, because his intention was to annihilate the entire Jewish people. Unlike the Hanukkah story, where it was about annihilating Judaism but not Jews, this is about annihilating all the entire Jewish people, from the children to the adults and all the way. And here's a man who nothing's getting in his way. He's got a plan. He's going ahead step by step, working out his plan. And the plan turns around on him, and there's no obvious miracle going on over here. And he has actually built a gallery to hang Mordecai, who is the uncle of Esther, a great tzaddik, and he ends up being hung on his own, his own gallows. So this is the amazing turnaround. And the message of Purim is that God is almighty and God is always in control. You have choice. You have free choice. You can choose to go against God's will, but you can never, ever undermine God's will. You can choose to do other than what God wants you to do, but even if you choose to do other than what God wants you to do, what you end up doing will serve God's plan no matter what. And therefore, what difference does it make if whatever choice I make, whether it's in favor of God's will or against God's will, What difference do my choices make if God's will reign supreme? The difference isn't to history. The difference is to you, right? Because if you understood, who you are in connection to God, why in the world would you go against God's will? And so what a person doesn't understand is their choices will have far-reaching ramifications for their life, but not for the big story. The story is going to work out just fine. The question is, are you going to be a player or are you going to be used as a tool by God? That's really the story. And that's why Mordechai says to Esther, we have this situation where there's been a decree to annihilate the entire Jewish people. And this is your opportunity to step in and be the conduit for salvation. And if you don't do it, salvation will come from somewhere else. Now, that doesn't sound like a very good argument, because if salvation will come from someone else, let it come from somewhere else. And why should I risk my life for the Jewish people? And what's weird about it is he doesn't guilt her. He doesn't tell her this could be the end of the Jewish people. He says, no, this is not the end of the Jewish people. Salvation for sure will come from somewhere else. And this inspires her, motivates her to take a risk on her life, because she realized that I could be the conduit for this salvation. I could play that role. I could be the servant of God and be the vehicle through which salvation will come into the world. And somebody else can do it, but I want to do it. Why shouldn't I do it? And be able to enjoy the joy of having a life that's meaningful and purposeful. And so Mordechai really was telling her the truth. God's plan will happen no matter what. The Jewish people are coming back to the land of Israel. Mashiach is coming. The Beit HaMikdash is going to be built. The question is not whether you're going to choose to make it happen. The question is, are you going to choose to be part of what's happening? That's really the question.
Wow, I'm really getting a sense that this story has so many foundational concepts that really help us understand how to make sense of the world, of God's role in the world, of our role in making choices, and how we affect the world. I mean, there's so many fundamental concepts that really affect the practical way we choose to live our lives. But just I want to make sure I understand this point correctly. Like with the Passover story, there were all these open miracles, and that was an open revelation of God. Like God is on front stage, as I almost call it. And it almost seems like with the Purim story, God is there. So the fact that his name isn't mentioned in the story, that's actually representing that it's almost like God's behind the stage. He's very much there, aware and directing everything that's going on. But the reason why his name isn't there is because just like in our almost reminds me of our day-to-day lives, we're not seeing these big revelations of God, and yet God is still there directing and a part of our lives.
Right. God is so there, you don't notice him. That's the hiddenness. Like you haven't noticed your breath except now that I mentioned it. But if I didn't mention it, you're not aware of the incredible constant miracle that you're breathing. You're not aware of your heart beating. It's happening all the time. It's so ever present, you don't notice it, right? What happened in the Passover story, it's not that God needed to interfere, but this was the educational message to show and to begin to educate people about God's presence and mightiness in the world. But the highest manifestation of God is not that he has to confront a man and put him down and beat him, but rather, I don't have to do anything, because no matter what you choose to do will serve my purpose. And it's up to you, either be, either consciously be in service of my purpose and enjoy the benefits of knowing that you did that, or delude yourself that you can undermine my purpose when you actually won't. You will serve my purpose too, but you won't know it, you won't feel it, and you won't benefit from it.
It's so interesting because in a sense, I think I would have thought if someone had asked me the question, what do you think is better? To have a total open revelation, to be so clear that God is in your life and in the world, or to not have it quite as clear. God is just as much there, but it's not as like blatantly obvious. And in my mind, I think I would have thought it's probably better when it's so clear. Like there are times, biblical times when it's like, how could you doubt? But the way you're explaining it in a certain sense, I think the answer would maybe be different, that actually choosing to see God in our lives when it's not as obvious, but it's not as obvious because he's actually so there that it's again, but we have to pay attention to it. In a certain sense, it sounds like that actually potentially could be had greater potential for really connecting to God in a very different kind of way.
Right, in a way that's much more consistent, to realize, to start opening your eyes to the subtlety of the presence and the continuous miracles that are happening right now. I think I once shared before, if somebody splits the sea, some guy goes onto the beach and says, "Hey, excuse me, everybody, I'm going to split the sea." Then people are really impressed the first time. Shows up the next day, "Hey, I'm going to split the sea." Could he actually do it again? He does it again. Wow, that's pretty good. Shows up the third day. "Hey, I'm going to split the sea." "Oh, not this guy again. Done that, been there. I don't know how you do it, but okay." And then fourth time, fifth time, it's like, ho hum, what a boring guy. Can't you do something else? Maybe pull a rabbit out of your hat, right? Why is it a miracle to split the sea if it happens once? But if the sun rises and sets and the sea is waving consistently, why is that not a greater miracle? It's because if something happens once, we think it's a miracle. And if something happens over and over again, we think it's nature. No, it's actually even more miraculous that it's happening over and over again, and we're not noticing it.
It's such a powerful example because I really get what you're saying. In a sense, you're right. I think maybe, and I'm understanding now, maybe one of the messages of Purim too is like, open up your eyes, people. Remember that in everything that just seems, so to speak, natural, God is here, God is present. And it's a reminder to really, like, even you're talking about our breath, our heartbeat, things we take for granted, the sun rising. It's like suddenly I'm thinking of your example, open up and see the miracle. But what that does to me as I think about that, it actually makes me feel even more connected to God.
Absolutely, because you feel God in every beat of your heart and every breath of your lungs. That's the miracle that we're alive. Every thought that arises in your mind, it's all a miracle. It's all the presence of God. And so the reason why God is hidden is because he's so present, we don't even notice him anymore.
So what changed? Meaning, because in a certain sense, it turns everything on its head for me a bit. I completely hear what you're saying, but there was a time where God was saying he wasn't as present to us, so it almost as if it was like a wake-up call. I'm here, people. So I'm splitting the sea. I'm here, people. I'm doing these miracles. I'm even going to the idea of talk. Biblically, people spoke to God. I don't think most of us can say God has actively spoken to us. So what changed that earlier on it was almost as if God did come in with the loud voice and big miracles, and now it's this different.
It's an educational process, It's from childhood to adolescence to being an adult. The child needs some big fancy, sound and light shows. But as you get older, God willing, there's fireworks happening on the first couple of days when you meet your husband or wife. But when you get married, the fireworks isn't there anymore, but it shouldn't have to be there anymore. It should be there in a much more subtle, much more powerful, much more real way that I don't need to have a big sound and light show. Just the fact that we are together, and sharing our lives. And maybe we don't even need to say anything right now to feel that deep connection. But there's different times in our lives that the connection needs to be, introduced in a very powerful way, in a very overwhelmingly obvious way. But then we want to kind of pull back so that you realize that what was so obvious is actually here and now and always was. And it was all a question of getting you to recognize it.
That is so interesting because we definitely get when it comes to the human level, there's stages of development, and we have to go through certain stages, like for a child to eventually be able to make healthy, good decisions. Initially, it's the parent really guiding them and walking them through it, but the goal is for them to become more independent. And in a sense, if I'm understanding correctly, on a national level, like our birth happened through Egypt, the birthing canal through Egypt, and then it was almost like we're a child as a nation, but the goal is to become more mature, more adult-like, and be able to, in a sense, I'm thinking too, when you're not seeing God as clearly, there is more about I need to make a choice. God is everywhere, so close, but I'm still have to choose to see it, and that's more of an adult making choices. So, on a national level, that's what
Yeah,
happened to us.
absolutely.
What's so interesting about this is, again, like for me, it turns things on its head to a degree because I think so many of us, I assume I'm not alone, would have thought, open revelation was better and we were maybe even on a higher spiritual level. And that the fact that it's so much harder to see God today, it almost seems as though maybe we're just not as close or not as clear of a conduit to receive. But the way you're explaining it is, in a sense, the lack of clarity is actually potentially a higher level. almost again as I think of someone's maturity, because it creates an opportunity for choice. If something is so clear, like I think if something's so clear, like it's obvious to most normative people that if you put your hand on fire, you're going to get burnt. So we don't do such things. And yet there's so many other things that are also dangerous, but the immediate effect isn't something that hurts, or it starts to become a little bit murky and questionable, and then sometimes we have to make that choice. And I'm
Well,
recognizing too with
that's
God.
why it says that the Jewish people accepted Torah in a way that was even on a higher level than they did at Sinai, because at Sinai they kind of really didn't have a choice because it was so overwhelmingly obvious that this is the voice of God and the will of God. But what happened at Purim that the Jewish people had a renewal of their commitment to Judaism, and that's because now it comes from a real place of choice because I am capable of denying the presence of God. And now, because of that, I'm capable of choosing to acknowledge the presence of. If I wasn't capable of denying it, then I'm not capable of really acknowledging it. And so I'm really somewhat of a victim. And this is not really a relationship because a relationship is something that's born out of choice.
So the whole concept then of choice when it comes to this holiday that we're celebrating Purim and the capacity, again, I'm thinking there's so many fundamental concepts that come in. So at first, when I'm thinking this is a great story, and yes, of course, it's important and great to know that part of our Jewish history, but the fact that this has been put as part of the Torah, and especially at first I'm saying God's name isn't even mentioned, and yet now I really am understanding this because there's so many fundamental concepts that are so central, especially to our mature nationhood, that really we need to integrate and be reminded of every single year.
Yeah.
So that really does give a much deeper understanding. So I want to thank you, Rabbi, because I think as all of
Thank
us
you.
go to hear the Megillah this coming Purim, and we don't hear God's name, it's almost so blatant. Like it's almost God's name is even maybe more present since we're not hearing it mentioned. But now we're hearing it with totally different ears of saying the fact that God's name isn't mentioned, it's because he's so present. It's sort of like, again, you're just saying my heart is beating all the time. I can forget about it until I consciously think about it, but it's almost like the silent scream. He's so present, but that's exactly the opportunity is, do I see God throughout the story? But more
Exactly.
importantly, do I see God in my life?
That's right. You got it.
I want to thank you all for joining us, Soul Tack, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.